As an university professor, let me allow to put this question of freedom of expression into the broader historical and theoretical context, because this issue on freedom of expression is not a new one. I want to start, but very brief, with one of the first inventions in communication technology. This was when Gutenberg invented the printing press. And this was a revolution, a technological revolution, but what were the consequences of that? First, the church was very happy about this and said, now we can print the Bible and can distribute our message directly to the rest of the world. But at the same time, other groups came up and said, okay, we can produce some pamphlets now which are criticizing the church and can distribute it also to the rest of the world. And suddenly, governments came and said, oh, we have to keep this under control. And they introduced a system of censorship, which was the index, and said, okay, you cannot publish before you have the license or confirmation by the priest or by somebody else. So, and then came a man which was called John Milton, and he said, okay, look, what's going on here? If we look at all the history on the Areopag in Greece, this is a place where people come together, say, they trade goods, and they change also their ideas and information. And he wrote an Areopagitica where he really developed the concept of the right to freedom of expression as an individual right, which is not given by the government to the individual, but which belongs to the individual. That means the owner of the right to freedom of the expression is the individual. And the governments have to make sure that this right can be implemented on this individual level. And so that's why also the concept of free trade and free flow of information are very interlinked, coming from this big perspective. And if you go through all waves of technological development, you see the same reaction when the telegraph was invented. Create new opportunities, but soon governments realized they have to keep this under control. And in 1865, it was Napoleon III who invited governments to Paris, and they signed the International Telegraph Convention. And Article 4 of the International Telegraph Convention from 1865 is more or less a censorship paragraph, which allows the governments to intervene in the telegraphic traffic if secrets or governmental interests or national security is concerned. So a paragraph which allows you to do everything. By the way, the ITU celebrates, this date as its birthday, and because this was the beginning of the ITU, and sometimes, I had discussion with ITU officials and say, be a little bit careful if you celebrate too much the 1865 convention, then probably, you support also the concept of censorship. It was clearly done in this 1865 convention. And only after World War II, when we had the new beginning in the United Nations, then the international community was able to create a broader legal framework, which is reflected in Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And here it's very clear that this was then the agreement that there should be the right to freedom of expression includes the right to receive, seek, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers and via any media. And I think this is up to date the international legal basis we have. However, there was also an Article 29 in the Universal Declaration, which gives the nation states the sovereign right to create legal frameworks on the national basis. And this combination of freedom on the one hand and some restrictions, justified restrictions on the other hand, is reflected and also in the convention from 1966, which has in its paragraph 19.3 4 categories where it's justified to have restrictions. And these all are very vague reasons. This is national security, public order, this is moral, and public health. So that means how you define internationally what national security is. China has probably a different approach to them than Denmark to national security, or what is moral. India has a different approach than Saudi Arabia or Germany or the United States. That means we have no standards which really make clear. And in so far the conclusion is, from the legal framework, that there will never be internationally agreed a framework of clear principles. So that means you have to live with differences. And what Milton said the day before yesterday in the discussion, then he said, okay, we have to look into the national legislation, and one country can regulate within its country according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant. So, but it cannot speak for the rest of the world. But it means we have to live with these differences. And if it comes to cases, then we have to look on a case-by-case basis, you know, whether values or other legal goods are affected. This makes it certainly much more difficult, but there is no alternative. And the funny thing is that when the internet emerged, the same discussion we had after the invention of the printing press and the telegraph and all this new media, now also in the internet world. So the same arguments coming, you know, from different circles. Governments say, okay, we have to keep this under control. Commercial groups say, you know, we have to channel the money stream. And on the other hand, you have groups that say, you know, this is a great new opportunity for the distribution of our ideas. And if we go further down from the internet to the core resources, and insofar it was interesting what Michael just said, then you see the same arguments now around the introduction of new top-level domains. So that means you have these two kinds of censorship. Some governments raise political concerns, some companies raise commercial concerns. And again, you know, there will be no consensus. To expect there is a consensus in a general way is unrealistic. What you have to do, that's the only way, you have to build a community, you have to discuss, you have to create a consensus, and at least a rough consensus, and to go case by case through this issue. With regard to the justified restrictions, let me add a final argument, and this is okay. Sorry, I'm really speaking too fast. Normally, I need 40 minutes for this lecture. Okay, the final point I want to raise is the following one. Okay, freedom is the principle, and justified restrictions are justified. But if it comes to the restrictions, there are limitations for the restrictions. You know, I've grown up in a communist country where the Article 19 was read from the different corner. First the restrictions and then the freedoms. So, but we have to talk about that justified restrictions have itself their restrictions. They cannot be used, even if they are written in law, to undermine the basic principle. And the basic principle is freedom of expression. And this has to be clear. It means you can a little bit, you know, to avoid the misuse of freedom. That's why there are justifications for the restriction of freedom. But if you go too far with this justification of restrictions, you end up with a censorship system, and this leads to a dictatorship. And I think we have to put to ask this big question if we go to the very detail, like the introduction of new TTLDs, because this is what you can learn from history. The structure of the debate, and by the way also the arguments in the debate, have never changed over the last 400 years, and I expect they will not change the next 100 years. So this will be a battlefield for the years ahead. Thank you.